Welcome to another episode of the Hope Strategy Podcast. We're doing things a little bit differently today. I've got Josh here on with me. Josh, what's up?
Hey.
I, as always, am Corey, co-host here of the Hope Strategy Podcast. We're going to do things a little bit differently today and interview me. Josh is going to be interviewing me, Corey Blake. And in another episode, I'm going to interview Josh. And some of the, feedback that we've gotten as we've got this podcast going and as we've been fortunate enough to have people jumping in and listening and hearing all these amazing stories. There's a little bit of question of who the heck is Josh and who am I and where are we coming from and how did we end up in this place? And Josh and I decided it would be kind of fun to interview each other the way that we interview our guests, hearing the background and the stories that kind of have led us to this stage in life and where we're at. So that's what we're going to do today. We hope you enjoy. If not, move on to the next episode and enjoy that one. But without further ado, introducing myself, Corey Blake.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley. Josh, take it away. You're the interviewer today.
All right. Well, welcome, Corey Blake, to the Hope Strategy Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I promised not to do any softball questions today, so I was going to ask, how hard is it to be so good looking, but I'm going to save that question for another time. So Let's dive into it. Where are you from originally? Where did you grow up? And I know this is a trick question for you.
Yeah. So obviously, you know me well. It'll be fun for you to get maybe a little more insight into some of these answers, but yeah, set me up all day. I am from a military family. So my dad served in the Air Force for 22 years. I was born at Hill Air Force Base in Layton, Utah. That's where I was born and then brought up throughout the rest of my life, moving around quite a bit from Utah to South Carolina, back to Utah, then to Japan, then back to Utah again for a little bit, which has kind of always been a bit of a home base for me. Lived in Japan for 3 years as a first, second, and third grader. Back to Utah again, and there you will get into why there were so many moves back to Utah, I think, as part of the conversation. But then ended up living in Germany on Ramstein Air Force Base from the time I was 10 until I was almost 16. And that was a lot of the formative years. And then my dad retired from the Air Force, me being the youngest of 4 siblings. So I was around for when he retired. And then we ended up back in St. George, Utah, where I went to high school and finished things up living at home.
So you went through some tough stuff when you're pretty much a little kid. Your parents got divorced when you were 5. Is that right?
Yep. I was 5.
Do you remember that? Do you remember what it was like before and after?
Yeah, I do. It was a pretty, being almost 34 now and having a lot of time to reflect on this over the years as I've built my own family up and stuff. It was, I look at my 6-year-old and my 9-year-old and 1.5-year-old and recently born 8-day-old a lot. And I think, man, their life is just so, so very different at this stage. It's apples and oranges. Cause I, definitely grew up in a home where my mom was an alcoholic. She came, I've gained a lot of empathy for her over the years just because her upbringing was brutal, with just a history of abuse, all types of abuse as a kid and growing up. But anyways, it led her to having a very dysfunctional relationship with my dad and turning to addiction and really struggling. And my dad having his own, issues in their marriage, just kind of being a kind of a big, as far as I've always heard, a screw up from day one. And so, my first years were that, and I do remember it. I do remember a lot of little glimmers of, experiences as a kid. But yeah, they got divorced when I've always heard that it was just after my 5th birthday that my mom ended up leaving. And that was kind of the catalyst of the whole divorce and finalizing all that.
Do you remember being afraid and stuff? I mean, do you remember it being a tough time, leading up to the divorce, or were you too young to really process what was going on?
Well, for the sake of transparency, and since this is our podcast, then, I'll be, I guess, a little more transparent and vulnerable. Definitely have memories before being, before the divorce and stuff. And then after, there's quite a few stories as well, but of, fear and uncertainty. And obviously as a 4 or 5 year old or 3-year-old, not knowing what those emotions were, again, because that was just my norm, and I'll say some things. I'm guessing that, I love my dad a lot and I love him to death, and he's the best. I don't have much of a relationship with my mom, but if she's listening, hi Mom, I love her too. I've got quite a few memories of getting in the car, because I was the youngest, so my siblings would be in school, and I have a couple of specific memories of my mom drinking. We'd go to the gas station and she'd come out with kind of a brown paper bag with her, whatever she was drinking in it. We'd get in the car and then we'd go to the park, and she would just tell me to go play at the park, and she would sit in the car and drink. And then, I'd get back in the car with her and drive. And I remembered even as a little kid, like, again, I have like vivid memories, but just those early emotions of just being like, this doesn't feel right, and kind of that uncertainty and that a little bit of that fear. There was a lot of yelling and screaming in our house and a lot of fights, definitely not a peaceful place. And so, yeah, I definitely have some early memories. Again, if I'm trying to balance it out, I also have amazing siblings. I have 3 older sisters that took care of me and watched out for me. And some of my greatest memories as a kid are those moments with them that they were a little older and had a little more understanding of what was going on. And they were very protective of me. And like I said, my dad always, made sure to take me to the side and build a relationship with me. And I've always had a good relationship of trust with him because of that. But definitely not an ideal first couple years on earth. That's for sure.
And then your parents got divorced, but then your dad went through some remarriages, more than one. So it wasn't as though everything was hunky dory after the divorce either, right?
Yeah. So they got divorced when I was 5 or something. We went and lived, I think some of my happiest memories, again, if you're trying to I've been fascinated with this, as you can imagine. And I'm sure you've thought a lot about this too. It's interesting because now I'm raising my kids and I love my wife more than anything. And I would say that we've got a very healthy marriage and a healthy relationship, and we're great friends. And there's a lot of what I hope our kids will remember is a lot of laughter and peace and happiness in our home. But I wouldn't change the way that I was brought up because it's made me who I am. So I've had a lot of this introspective thought of well, what does this mean for my kids? A lot of the tough things that I've learned and a lot of what I feel has formed my character in a lot of ways comes from a lot of the ups and downs I faced early on. Mm-hmm. Because so kind of the question, my dad they got divorced. And what I was getting at, I guess, is that some of my happiest memories, or what balanced that out, is we then had the opportunity to go live with my grandparents for, I don't know the exact timelines, but I'm going to say 6 months, because I went to kindergarten. I finished kindergarten in a small town in southern Utah where my grandparents lived. And I built a bond with my grandma and grandpa that otherwise I never would have built. And they looked out for me. And to this day, my grandma and I are so close, and I talk to her often. My grandpa passed away a few years ago, but he and I had a really unique and special bond and relationship. I moved away and lived away from my parents for a while, but built this amazing relationship with my grandparents. And then after that, there was a couple years later, my dad was married again and did his best, and that failed. And then they got divorced. And then a few years later, he got married again and did his best, and that failed. And so there was a lot of, and then they ended up he got married again going into my senior year of high school, and they're married to this day. And that's been a huge win. But it was a lot of ups and downs and a lot of question marks and uncertainty. And it definitely formed some interesting perceptions on the world that eventually I've had to come to terms with on how I saw things and what I expected from people and stuff, because of so much getting taken away so kind of drastically and so abruptly, kind of all throughout my childhood.
Mm-hmm. I think everybody who gets married is afraid of divorce, but perhaps it's more so when you've grown up seeing so much of it. Are there specific steps you've taken consciously to say, that's not going to happen to me and my wife and our family? And what have you done?
We have the benefit, for better or for worse sometimes, because we kind of laugh, because Bridget and I are both the youngest in our families. Bridget's the youngest of 7 and I'm the youngest of 4. Bridget's parents are divorced as well. And so not only do we have these marriages of our parents that we've looked at, and we've had those conversations, and we got married pretty early. And so we had these conversations very early on, like, we don't want to end up that way. So what did your parents do that we don't want to do? And what did you see in your home that we don't want to do? We've had those conversations, I think, because we both knew they needed to be had, because we had seen the other side of it from, our third or fourth date when we realized, wait, we really like each other. Let's look at this as a real potential match, like a long-term marriage type match. Mm-hmm. Not that we said that early, but I think we were both just curious as we were looking for a partner. But we've also had the opportunity to look at our older siblings and say, we're both the youngest, and we've got, between the two of us, 9 other examples of marriages that we've seen, from either, I think when we got married, our next closest sibling had been married for maybe already 5 years or something, So it was like, we were able to really gauge and look at what we liked and what we didn't like. And that's always been a central part of our relationship, and just being open and honest and transparent with each other, and in what we want to be and what we don't want to be. Specifically, we've made a very, very intentional effort to not raise our voice, not have any confrontation that escalates to a place where we lose sight of our main priorities, which are each other and our kids, and not letting some, ego or selfishness or whatever, escalate our emotion to a place that it has a negative effect on our kids. We don't ever talk. I mean, it's just not even, it's funny to even say, because it's just not even in our vernacular as a couple, but we don't talk about divorce in any way, shape, or form, with each other. We don't joke about it. It's just not something, we take it obviously very seriously, having both seen a lot of it in our lives. We make a real solid effort. And I think probably one of the biggest things we've done is we've made a goal that I can honestly say to this day that both of us have kept, to never say anything bad about each other to anybody else. Because I had seen a lot growing up, whether it was with older siblings that were in marriages, or parents or friends when they started getting married, where you hear, what I noticed is I would hear people say like, oh man, my wife is like, or my husband is just like so obnoxious. They do this, and this. And I don't have context, because I don't spend much time with these people, right? Like a spouse does. Mm-hmm. So
that's all you know.
That's all I know. Say. Without the context, I'm like, man, their wife sucks, or man, their husband must be a jerk. But really, they could be an amazing person, and they just have this bad habit that for some reason their spouse decided to vent to me for whatever reason. We just said early on, like, it's not because we're trying to hide anything. Obviously, it's just because I hold my wife, and I hope she holds me kind of on this pedestal of like, we really do love each other, and we respect each other, and we care for each other, and we're our biggest fans. And so why would we ever go say anything negative to anybody else to try to, I mean, there's zero good that could come from that, right? There's been times that I've asked for advice from like a parent or a sibling or something, but never in the light that it's like, Bridget's doing this, what I mean? It's more like, hey, in your experience, how do you manage this, or how do you communicate this? And always coming back to, how much we love and admire and respect each other. So that's probably been the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things we've done, in addition to some of those others that I mentioned.
Cool. Thanks. I'm taking notes here. This is good advice.
Yeah. You're always talking bad about I'm just kidding. That one was for you. I'm just kidding. You're a great example of that.
Yeah. This was your opportunity to finally give me the advice you've been wanting to give me for years, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious. So like, you have a 6-year-old right now. Mm-hmm. And you were about 6 years old when your parents got divorced. And like you were saying, like, you don't have a lot of relationship with your mom because you didn't see her a lot after you were 6 years old. You were raised by your dad. Is that weird to look at your 6-year-old and think, gee, like, I know my 6-year-old so well, and I love my 6-year-old so much. And yet if I disappeared today, he would grow up saying like, yeah, I didn't really know my dad that well. Is that weird?
Yeah, it is very weird. And that's one of those thoughts I mentioned that I have, like, it's just a different world. I mean, it's not this, it's interesting how two people can live a life, that's what we have all in common, right? You and me and my kids and my mom and we're all living a life on earth, but our experiences can be complete apples and oranges. Like I said, like his experience is not the same as mine. I would hope that because we have such a great relationship, I try my best to spend quality time with him. I think he's got a lot of great memories of life. I would hope that if I disappeared today, he would have some fond memories of me, which I don't have many of those, if any. But yeah, it's mind blowing to think if he was 20 years old making some life decisions and he didn't have me from the time, from today, he wouldn't have much to draw on from me. It would just be, I had a dad, and it's a trippy thought, one that I don't enjoy having very much.
All right. Well, let's talk about the professional side of things here. So you're at BYU Hawaii, you're a student, and you had two opportunities, either come work with me or be a dentist. So what went into making that fateful decision? And then later I'll ask you whether you regret it or not.
Oh, that's funny it's funny to put it that way.
Because whenever there's tough times in our business, I'm always like, I wonder if Corey wishes he were a dentist right now.
Okay, let's rewind a little bit. So one thing that I want to address from growing up, because
Sure.
as we dive into more professional stuff, I think it's going to come up a lot in kind of my mentality today. There was a stage in life when, I don't think it's a secret at this point on this podcast that you and I are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That continues to come up. And it's part of who we are. But I served a mission for the church, which a lot of people do, and they're 18 now, 19 back then. And I was in Guatemala learning a new language, living all over the jungle with random Latino kids that I'd never met before that didn't speak English. And anybody that's been through that experience, which you have, how brutal it can be, right? It's a lesson in how, the hardest things in life can be the hardest things in life, but also bring you the most reward and enjoyment and joy and happiness. Because it really is. I mean, again, if you're take religion out of it, but if you just took any kid that just graduated high school and said, we are going to pick you up and drop you in Canalitos, Guatemala, just outside the city of Guatemala, in a little mountain village with a Panamanian kid that doesn't speak a word of English. And you have to work from 6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. every single day in a language you don't know, with people you don't understand, not just from a language standpoint, but culturally, everything else, and you're also going to be going from living in your nice home in the United States to living in a little cement 4x4 room where you shower outside with a bucket of cold water. And you know what I mean? Like, take that is just a hugely dramatic experience, right? You can empathize with me on this. And so I was doing that, and I was finding, it's funny because I kept a journal almost that whole time. And that first couple months, if you look at my journal, there are literal days where my handwriting looks like the handwriting of a serial killer, because I was so anxious and depressed and sad and lonely, and just, I was fighting some demons, like I was like, what am I doing? Do I want to be here? And I was writing really, and again, full transparency, it was like angry handwriting. I don't know if you've ever written when you're really emotional, but it's like, it's a little more jagged. And it's like, I hate being here. I don't like these stupid people. They don't speak my language. The mind of an 18-year-old, right? Like trying to comprehend all of this. And then the very next day you'll read it and it's like, I love this. It's the best experience of my life. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm on this emotional roller coaster. But at about the year mark, I had to confront a lot of the kind of these demons that I was facing that I didn't know where they were coming from. But I had this fear and this anxiety that I was going to leave. You're supposed to be there for 2 years. And I thought, no, this is coming to an end. One way or another, I'm having these high highs, but these low lows. And one way or another, I just had this feeling, this anxiety that the walls were going to crumble down and it was going to end. I went and each of these areas, each of these missions has somebody that's kind of the leader, and it's called a mission president. And I went to him and I was doing really well. I was very successful, in quotes, as it pertained to missionary work and being down there and the language and all this stuff. But I went to him when I had an opportunity to talk to him, and I said, I think I'm going to go home. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like for him looking at me, he's like, all the numbers look good. All the statistics that I would look at to assess a good missionary versus one that's going to go home. You seem to be doing great. What are you talking about? And he blocked off the rest of his schedule for that day. And he was a psychiatrist that had been asked to go down there and run this mission. And he blocked out, he said, I'm going to block out the rest of my day. I can remember him telling his assistant, hey, cancel my meetings today. And we sat in the room and we talked for an entire day.
Wow.
Yeah. And he asked me about my childhood. He asked me about my upbringing. He asked me about, and we got into some really, it was the first time I was ever emotional. It was the first time that I ever kind of some of these wounds from my upbringing, with, again, like marriage, abusive, unhealthy relationship, terrible early memories, divorce, getting my hopes up with a second mom coming into the picture, who then they were divorced 6 months later. And it was fairly immediate and sudden. And I had brothers for the first time that were then gone, one day to the next, gone. And then building up again to where my dad got married again. And I had a couple of other brothers again. And what I thought was, this is it. This is the relationship, and a lot of emotional, attachment to that. And then literally going to basketball camp in 9th grade and coming home and them being gone and being like, wait, where'd they go? Like what's, where did those 3 humans that were, a mom and 2 brothers that were kind of a critical part of my life? And it was literally like, we're getting divorced, and then like walk out of the room.
Yeah. What does that do for your sense of stability about life in general?
I was like, wait a minute. So that's just it. That's how it worked, So this had happened multiple times. And then my dad got married again, like I said, going into my senior year. And I told him, no, I was like, no, you're not getting married again. I mean, it was my first like man-to-man talk with him as like a 17-year-old, like, no, you're an idiot. This is a bad idea. Don't do this to anybody again. Anyways, like I said, love my stepmom. She's the best. And that's all worked out. But anyway, so fast forward again to when I'm down in Guatemala, and I tell him all of this, and I'm like, it's bringing to the surface a lot of things I had never thought about, a lot of emotions I'd never come to terms with, and a lot of realizations of kind of who I was and why I had this fear that I was going to go home. And basically what he said to me was, at the end of probably, maybe 3 or 4 hour conversation, he said, you believe that all good things in your life will come to an end. And you need to stop believing that.
Because that's what you had experienced.
That's what I had experienced.
That's what happened every other time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You have a reason to think that way because of this, and this, and the way you were brought up and how this all panned out for you. But that's not how life is. There is hope in life, and there's optimism in life, and you need to change. You need to have a complete paradigm shift, because all good things in your life will not come to an end. And there will be amazing things in your life that just stick around and they stay. And if you choose to focus on those things, you'll find them. And so he told me, like leaving, he said, what I want you to do is you are going to notice as you go about your day that you have you have negative thoughts constantly. And every time one of those negative thoughts comes into your mind, I want you to say in your head or out loud, all good things don't have to come to an end. Good things can happen to me in one way or another. I can't remember the exact words.
He gave you new programming though, new self-talk.
Yep, exactly. He uploaded a new file into my database, and I left, and I literally, I'm not kidding you, like within 5 minutes of walking out of that office after this amazing experience and this breakthrough, had thoughts like, there's no way we're going to make it to that appointment that we have to get to on time. And the bus is probably going to be late. And I would go stand right there, but that guy doesn't look too nice, and maybe I should stand over here because who knows what he's going to, whatever, like it was just negative talk in my head, like constant negative talk. And I realized that my internal self-talk was all negative, not all, but most of it. I started saying, no, that's not true. I'm going to go, we're going to be on time today. Yeah, no, this is going to go amazing. This is going to go fantastic. No, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be the best at it. And it took a lot of work, but over the next 2 to 3 months, my life changed completely, because I built a new habit and I built a new talk track in my brain. And I just started to see things different. I started to have this abundance mentality about what the opportunities in life were and where things could go if you just, I'm not a big believer in like The Secret or something. It wasn't that. It wasn't like I was dreamboarding and what, not that I don't think that's a good idea, but it was just in my head. That's all it was. It was simply, when I have a negative thought, I'm going to change that.
Yeah. Where's that balance between unrealistic fantasy illusion and realistic optimism? Like, where do you draw a line, or how do you balance that? Or how do you know, like, I'm being crazy and unrealistic, or no, this is just, life isn't bad. It's sometimes good. And I buy into that.
In my experience, I think it comes down to action and taking steps towards whatever that lofty ambition is, or that goal that you have, and that positive, so if the positive thought is, you know what, I think I could start a digital marketing agency. I don't know anything about digital marketing, but I think I could get that off the ground and bring in some deals. And I think I could, I think I could start a business here that's going to be successful. to my previous self or to anybody else, that might seem like, you don't know anything about that. What are you talking? That's just a pipe dream. Don't waste your time. But my kind of test in all of these things is action. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the first maybe 2, 3, 4 steps and see what my results are, and be honest with myself and not have an ego that says, no, I can, I'm going to make this pipe dream a reality if I just keep doing it. I think you just have to be honest with yourself and definitely be bold and take the steps and be brave and be bold and take, get in over your head and take some serious steps towards progress. But again, leave your ego behind. And if you recognize pretty early that it's just not going to pan out, it's not, be honest and pivot. So, action, I think, is the way. Because a lot of people that have done incredible things, if they never would have taken those steps and realized that it was a possibility, and they would have just said no from the beginning, they would have missed out on some big opportunities. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of people that probably waste way too much time, energy, money, resources, everything else on something that's never going to happen because they're not being honest with themselves.
So action, but then also honestly, openly considering the feedback and then taking new action and responding to that, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. And just I've said it on this podcast a few times, when we talked to Elvin, it came up. I think when we talked to Emma, Jade, it came up. A couple others, like this idea that I've had of just getting in over your head and just jumping in and doing and seeing what happens. And then opportunities tend to present themselves if they're supposed to. And if it's meant to, if there's opportunity, take advantage of it. And then what I've seen is those opportunities build on each other, and they compound and eventually good things continue to happen. So I wanted to get that in there because that was the turning point for me. Right. Cool. We're not talking right now if that moment didn't happen after a fairly traumatic upbringing and a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah. I mean, how would the rest of your life be different right now if it weren't for that?
It would be insanely different. It would not be anywhere close to as happy and fulfilling as I feel and as I've been fortunate enough to kind of experience to date. Not that there hasn't been incredible difficulties and a lot of trials and ups and downs and tribulations along the way, and personal battles that I fought and things I've had to work on, and making sure my marriage is strong and raising kids and all these things. It's difficult, it's tough, but the outlook is everything. Going back to the question though, so for professionally, so I was a student, but when I was a kid, I was always interested in sales and entrepreneurship. I didn't know it was called that, but like when I was 10, I was selling Pokemon cards and basketball cards and candy, and loved the feeling of, buying a Pokemon card for $2 and selling it for 20. I just remember feeling like, man, I love that. And then, in high school, I always kind of had ways of making money here and there, and just little, what again, now I'm recognizing as entrepreneurial experiences, to start something and make a little something off of an effort. I then, was in college and I didn't know what I was going to do. But at that point, between, those early days of learning that I liked that stuff to then actually pursuing some different opportunities in sales for about, at that point, maybe 5 or so years, I was in college and I didn't know what I was going to do. And after trying everything, I literally was going to be a pilot, and I was going to be a psychologist, and I was going to be a doctor, and I was going to be, a lawyer, whatever, everything. The kind of climactic moment in my college career when I had about a year left, I realized I've got to figure out what I'm going to do. And I was talking to my brother-in-law. I learned all about dentistry. I was like, I think I'd like that lifestyle. I think I would do good at that. And I'm going to pursue that. And so I signed up for all the classes, the science classes that I needed to, and hated it and didn't know, I didn't think I was, talk about getting in over your head and realizing it wasn't a good fit. That was pretty quickly that happened. So I kind of thought, I'll probably go direction of selling something I've done in the past, whether it's like starting a pest control company or something, an industry that I knew. And then I obviously had known you before.
But we had never talked business before.
Never talked business. Our relationship, and again, for those that don't know, Josh is married to my oldest sister. So I've known Josh since I was 11, I think.
Yeah, 11 or 12 years old. So Corey was always like little Corey, like younger brother Corey.
Yeah, I remember the first time I talked to you on the phone when you called. I think you called my dad to ask if you could marry Bryn. And I remember getting on the phone with you and being like, why am I talking to this guy? Who is this dude? Like, like it was, I would love it if we had a recording of that call. My dad probably does, but it was just so, anyway, but I had never, our relationship to this point in my life was maybe the year or two before this. Now that I was more of an adult, we had things to talk about, but even still, our relationship was almost like a distant relative. I would say, you know, it was like,
yeah, because we hadn't really seen that much of each other up to that point.
Yeah. And we were just in different stages in life. You were a college student who was married, who was starting a business. And I was a dumb, you know, high school teenage kid that was doing my thing. And my grandpa passed away. This is the way I remember it. And sometimes my memories are a little off, so you can tell me if it's a little different, but my grandpa passed away and I was a student. And again, this was in 2012. So I had about a year and a half left in school, and it was the end of the year. And I flew home by myself. I didn't bring my wife or first kid, but I flew home for the funeral, or I came up. No, I think I flew home from Hawaii, or maybe I was in Arizona at the time. I can't remember, but I came to the funeral. You and I were driving, and did you pick me up at the airport? I think you picked me up at the airport and we drove down together.
Yeah. I don't remember. I just remember that it was the end of the year. It was like Christmas time and stuff. And that's when we started talking about, like, I was just curious, like, about your sales experience.
Yeah. And the story I've told and the way I remember it is that you said, I think aside from everything that we have in common now, which we've realized we have a lot in common, at that point, I didn't think we had much in common at all. Right. It was like, and I remember it just kind of being like an awkward moment. And then you said, so you do sales, right? That's what I remember as the start of the conversation. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing sales for a long time. And you were like, tell me about it. And then we just opened up and I started talking about it. And by the end of the conversation, which I'm pretty sure was the drive, about a 4.5, 5 hour drive, after talking and then kind of talking over that weekend we had together, whatever it was, I remember telling you, like, oh, you have this new little startup you're doing. I would love to do some consulting and help. And I remember just kind of throwing my name out there, or throwing the opportunity out there, because I was a starving student with a small family. I had no money. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And you were like, yeah, I'd definitely pay you to try to bring in some business for me. And I was like, oh, well, let's do it. You know? And so that really sparked my interest. And some of our initial conversations early on that had nothing to do with our digital marketing agency. It had everything to do with the separate project we were working on. I just remember feeling an excitement and an optimism and a positivity in those initial phone calls that we had that I had never experienced before. And I felt like I was getting in so deep over my head, because to me, you were just like this business guy that had been doing it for 10 years or whatever. And you knew stuff and I didn't. And I was asking questions and I was learning things I didn't know about. And I just felt this excitement that just led me to say, yeah, I'm going to pursue this. Like this is definitely something that I think could turn into something, if nothing else, just a great learning experience.
And now that you're in it, you're like, man, he didn't know squat. What did I get myself into? But it was for more background on it too. Like, I had been running my business since 1999, and I had hired about 15 different salespeople, some of whom were great people that I'm still friends with and I still admire and look up to and love these guys and stuff. And it was all guys. And maybe that was the mistake, but it was like, I would bring these people in and I was selling. So I knew, like, hey, I'm not a sales guy, but I'm selling. So if I bring somebody in and all they do is sales, they're not distracted by the other 50 things, they should be able to just, knock this out of the park. And then I went through 15 different salespeople and they all failed at sales. They're great in other ways, but it just wrong fit for the company in that period and the type of services we were selling. It was the wrong fit for them. It was the wrong fit for the business. Just didn't work out. So I'd been trying this out, and then I started talking to you and you're telling me all this sales stuff. And the way I remember it is that I asked you for some advice. I mean, this is what I tell people, and maybe I'm not remembering correctly either, but it seems like I asked you for some advice. And then I went back and I tried it out and it worked. And then I came back and said, hey, do you just want to do sales for me part-time or something? And but anyway. No,
that was right. Cause you had just, so you had actually just hired a salesperson for full occupancy, and you were asking me advice on how to manage that salesperson. You were saying am I paying them too much? Am I not paying them enough? How do you train, and and it's funny. We've never really talked about this since a long time ago. So you remember that? So that was actually the way it started. And then I said, because I didn't actually start doing sales for you, I started helping as more of a consultant to get your sales guy doing sales, to get him to perform. Mm-hmm. And this again was a moment where I got in over my head, but I told you probably after a week, you're paying this guy way too much money. He's never going to succeed. You're wasting a lot of time and money right now. And you were like, really? And it was like, this is, you set him up for failure. You're paying him too much. His commission structure's off, whatever. Right. Like I was like, this is not the right fit. Mm-hmm. And he's not responsive and I can't get him, and I've done a couple sales trainings with him and he just, whatever. Then it was like, let me hire a salesperson for you. And I did. I actually went through my network, remember, and I hired, I can't remember her name. So here comes the girl that you didn't have at that point, but I hired a girl through my network to do sales for you. And I started training her and she started seeing a little bit of success and doors were opening and stuff. But then some weird thing happened where she, like some family emergency, and remember, she just disappeared.
That's right. That was weird.
She was like, my dad's in Australia and they're getting divorced and I have to leave. And it was like, wait, what? Where did she go? Like, what happened? And so at that point I said, let me just do it.
For quitting a job.
Yeah. And I said, let me just do it. She's got some leads she's created. Let me try to figure this out. And then that's when it started. And then, deals started flowing like wine.
Yeah.
The deal started coming in and then I remember you said like, hey, do you want to come to this event with me in Philadelphia?
Philly? Philly.
So I came and I anyways got in again way over my head, and you were awesome to teach me and train me and help me and help me see what was out there. Cause this whole world of the internet and business and online stuff, I had no idea. It was a completely foreign world to me, that it still is very foreign to a lot of people out there. But once you kind of get in, you realize the opportunity and the different layers and dimensions of this digital world and all the business and opportunity that there is. And that was, I remember, so eye-opening to me.
So I brought you on for that side project, but then pretty quickly we realized, well, I had the two businesses. I had MWI, the agency, and then I had Full Occupancy, the self-storage thing. And the problem was Full Occupancy was small deals and MWI was big deals. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I needed help getting the big deals in at MWI. And it was like, you know what? I mean, if Corey can help me land these big deals, why do I have him trying to land these $200 a month deals when he could be landing $20,000 a month deals? And
if I remember, this is kind of funny that we're making history. We're creating our history right now. The way I remember it is I was like, it was $50 a month for these things. And I think you were like, yeah, I'll pay you 10% or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, all right. Like you're paying me a little bit of a base to help kind of build it out. But then I'm like, I started doing the math
work
and I'm like,
at $5 a month deals
I'm going to be 65 ready to retire and have like $2,000 in commission coming in each month. Like the number didn't make sense. And you were, and I remember hearing, I didn't know all the details at the time, but I knew you were investing heavily in it. And I was like, man, this is going to take a while. And I didn't know a lot about like forecasting and, kind of scaling out a business and stuff. But I did know my common sense was telling me, one, I'm not going to make a lot of money doing this, because even if I bring 100 of these accounts, that's $500 a month in commission to me. Which is, I want to make more money than that. And two, it just seems like it's not as scalable as it should be. And so I came to you and I said, because what happened, one of the leads from the Philadelphia event that we went to that I called after was a big warehouse in New York City. It was like East something, I can't remember, but it was a big warehouse where when people were doing imports, they held people's goods while they were going through like customs and stuff or whatever until they could be released, and like a truck would come pick it up and take it to Walmart. Right. So they had like this big warehouse, and he said, hey, do you guys do SEO for these warehouse, like for my warehouse? It's not a self-storage thing, but it is a storage. And I'm like, do we do what? And he's like, do you do SEO? And I'm like, let me look into that. I didn't know what SEO was at the time, because we were just selling websites at the time with like small marketing packages, but very minimal. And so I came to you and I said, do we do SEO? And I bet we could find these emails. And you said, yeah, we do. We do a little bit. We do like this local stuff for these websites. But where I really do SEO is with my other company, MWI. And I had heard of MWI again, because I'd known you as a, being around as you being my big brother-in-law, but I didn't know anything about it. And so I started looking into that and picking your brain on MWI, and realized, and you told me some of the size deals that you had brought in, and that there were no clients at the time. I think there was one client at the time, and you were really kind of putting all your eggs in this other basket and growing it. And I remember just telling you, like, doesn't it seem like if we closed some more MWI deals, then you could raise the funds and kind of more capital to invest in this other thing in order to grow it faster? Because otherwise it's going to take a year or 2 or 3 to get this thing on the map. Hopefully that was good advice. Maybe hindsight, we should have kept going with the other thing. I don't know. But that was where my head was at the time. And you were like, well, yeah, if you want to close those, I mean, you were so cool and you've always been this way. Like, it was just like, yeah, I mean, if you want to try to close those. So I took a deep dive on educating myself on digital marketing, on MWI and what you did. I looked at old case studies and you gave me emails that you had whatever, and really dove into that. And I said, I think I can start closing these. And I did. I went back to that guy and said, yeah, we can do this. And I think it was as full occupancy. And I think we charged like $1,200 a month for some SEO work. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, this is $1,200 a month versus $50. Like, this is a no-brainer. And then MWI kind of started becoming more of a topic of conversation. And then I started focusing on that. And then, here we are, 8 years later.
Yeah. And MWI was at one of its worst moments ever. It's had a few of those, but it was one of those worst moments ever where I had lost all the clients that we had, except for 3 clients. I was down to 3 clients at this moment. And so I was kind of in this position where I was like, well, I've got nothing to lose with MWI. I might as well put all my eggs into this full occupancy basket. But then you were like, you had that potential deal. And it was like, yeah, I mean, if I could grow MWI again from where it is, which was pretty much down to nothing. And the reason that happened was I had brought on an account manager. I was outsourcing all the business to somebody else. And he brought on an account manager that I didn't know. I didn't interview this guy. He just brought him on. And since I was essentially white labeling his service, he was just in charge. And then this account manager lost all of our clients. He was just not a very good account manager, apparently. So I ended up, by the time I pulled the plug, I had like 3 clients and like 10 grand a month in revenue or something. And I was trying to make this full occupancy thing work out because I thought, well, this is more scalable. Yeah, it's less money, but we can sell 1,000 of these things at $50 a month. And so that was the play I was going for. But then when you were saying, well, gee, let me close MWI deals, it was like, yeah, that'd be fine too. I mean, yeah, we could use that money, plug it into this other thing.
I started having different conversation. And again, it's funny. I've thought about this, Josh, a lot. Like, was that the right move? Like, I mean, obviously there's been so much good and MWI is thriving and growing and it's been an amazing experience, but with full occupancy, I still think full occupancy is a great idea. Like I all in on that idea still. I still do. And I still like the name and everything, but I'm like, it's funny. We just couldn't run 2 businesses at the same time. Yeah. And so maybe we need to get back on that, but because there is a version of this story where we just say, no, let's get some money and do this thing. And that kills it. But I just remember having the conversations with a couple of websites and stuff. And they're like, and I think the first website that I sold for MWI was a $20,000 website. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why would I waste any time selling these $50 ones? Like, this is 20,000, you know what I mean? And obviously I didn't understand a lot, but at the time it made so much more sense.
Yeah. This is the whole innovator's dilemma, the whole Clayton Christensen thing. Like, it is hard to sell small stuff when you can sell big stuff. It is. Yeah.
But it costs a lot more money to do the big stuff too. The ideal, the dream is, and where people get really rich is when they figure out how to do the really expensive stuff for a low cost.
You started selling for MWI. I mean, you were selling for full occupancy. You start selling for MWI. And the thing that you didn't know at the time was that I was looking for a partner for MWI. I had gone 10 years without a partner because I had a bad experience with partner. Not that he was a bad partner, just mismatch type stuff. But I swore off of having a partner. And so you started coming in and selling at MWI. And I'm starting to think like, man, like Corey's killing it at sales here. Like, maybe he's the partner I've been looking for. Like, maybe I can, he's young, moldable, straight out of college. I can mold him in my image and turn him into the partner I've always wanted. But then at the same time, I'm thinking like, this is my brother-in-law. Like, man, if this goes bad, like, this is really bad because it makes family reunions awkward and stuff.
Yeah.
There's just so many bad stories. So I'm like, not only am I considering taking on a partner for the first time in 10 years, but now I'm like going for like the statistically worst type of partner, which is a family partner. And this is just so risky, but at the same time you were killing it on sales. And so then I was like, man, but regardless, like I've got to get Corey doing more sales for MWI because this is going great. And this was right when I started writing for Forbes magazine too. So it's like, man, I'm writing for Forbes. Corey's closing deals. This is going great. And then you were committed to do summer sales that summer and you had to leave for like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, we were kind of making some progress and some headway. And then I had committed. And if one thing I've learned is if you make a commitment, keep it, or you tend to lose the trust of the people around you. So I knew how much money I could make that summer. And it was more money than I had thought I was going to make, kind of doing what we were doing. Mm-hmm. So it's funny because I remember that summer, I was out doing door-to-door sales and taking calls in between for MWI stuff. And everybody's like, what the heck are you working on? Like, what are you doing? And it was, people were so weirded out that I had some other weird digital marketing thing that nobody knew anything about. But I remember that really solidified things. And you're right, I had no idea you were looking for a partner, but I do remember at the end of that summer, that would have been, I think in 2013, really coming away with like, man, if I could find a way to keep doing this, I'd love it, and again, you were always so gracious. Like, and one thing I've learned a lot from you over the years is this whole idea of how detrimental ego can be in progress, because a lot of times people who had your experience and some of your wins and some of your failures, and they would have seen this like young whippersnapper, that was coming with ideas and telling you to let somebody go and saying, this guy's an idiot. Like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I've been doing this way longer. Why would I trust him? But you were always really good and really like gracious and just saying like, that's not a bad idea. And you still are that way, like you're willing to hear different perspectives and it kind of leaves the ego behind. And so I remember just feeling like that freedom of what I think and what we've learned as we've worked together is a really good partnership, and just like the real value and opportunity in entrepreneurship if you work with the right people. And we, going back to like marriage, a lot of times your partner's like your work wife, right? And you and I have always been very open and direct. I would say if there's ever been any hiccups in our partnership, it's probably the times that we're not. But we've been able to communicate really directly and just know that I can say what I need to say, and I'm not going to burn a bridge here, and I'm not going to hurt feelings, and I'm not going to get a reaction that's, angry or whatever. And so it's like that seeking to understand and to be understood. And
we've had some pretty tough conversations. I mean, it's not like our business has been easy. I mean, there've been conversations we've had about selling the business or switching up our partnership. And these are not easy conversations to have, but yeah, we've been able to make it work.
Yeah, we have. I've kind of laughed sometimes when people have asked about like what it's like having a partner and working with you and stuff. And I think a lot of our conversations, people would hear and say, there's 2 different things I've thought. One is they would hear our conversations and think, oh man, they're really upsetting the other person on the other line. Like on the other end of that phone call, I bet they're really mad and offended and whatever, and knowing like, no, I can speak my mind and kind of speak the truth of the situation in my opinion. And I'll get some really honest feedback from you. And nobody's, very rarely, if ever, I think if we had feelings hurt, and because again, we trust each other, I think, and we kind of leave the ego behind and just are looking to do the right thing. But then 2, that we've had so many conversations that I think, we walk out of, and I imagine that a lot of other partnerships or a lot of other relationships would have left that room screaming and yelling and livid and calling a lawyer, and you and I will talk about it. It's like, yeah, like, okay, it's pretty chill, pretty mellow, pretty, and sometimes there's emotion involved and stuff, but for the most part, we're able to, by the end of a conversation, come to a conclusion that we're both in agreement on. And we can say, okay, might not be my favorite thing. It might not be your favorite thing, but in the end, we're focusing on kind of the greater good here and what's best for not only us, but the rest of the people around us. And now we have a lot of employees and team members and stuff. And we've always seen things that way, which has been really helpful.
It's funny. Yeah. I mean, like you say, like other people would be yelling and screaming, and it's like, I know there's times when we've been like tense about something, but it's like, that's never filtered into our actions or long-term behavior. It's like, we've had conversations and I think we've gone away tense. And then like the next day, like we're thinking more clearly, we got maybe a little bit dysregulated, but people wouldn't necessarily even know that from the outside. They'd just be like, okay, that was a normal conversation. Everybody was even keeled, even though that was high stakes stuff. And on the inside, maybe we were boiling a little bit, but it was more like nervous stuff, but that's it, which is pretty amazing.
And I would say we're tooting our own horns here, but I would say that
We're awesome.
We've never really talked a ton about this, but if I'm looking at it and wondering why that is, like what's the why to all of that, I really think that there's a level of trust there. And I'm not just saying like, it's like a character trust thing. I think at least that's the way I see it. Like I know who you are and I trust that you're a good, decent human that is really trying to do your best and really not trying to screw anybody over at any point, you know? And so I can have these conversations, even if I disagree, and I can trust you. I have this trust that's like, no, we're going to figure it out. And I hope it's the same way. I think it's the same way, you know, you with me. Because there's not, you know, I don't know. There's just, we're not offended because you're not thinking we're out to get anybody. It's very, you know, respectful in that way.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the highest compliments I've ever received, not exactly, I mean, from you, but also through you it's a situation type thing, but this has happened on both sides, which is interesting, but there have been these conversations I've had on my side where somebody will say, oh, you need to make these changes in your business, or you need to do this, or you need to have this conversation with your partners. But like, tell me what your partnership structure is like, because if you go to your partner and you have this type of partnership, like they'll never go for this. And if it's this way, then you can just tell them like, this is how it is. And I'm like, no, that's not the way our partnership works. Like, I don't need to tell them how it is. And even if our partnership structure is that way, and if it's not that way, I can still have this conversation with Corey because we're just open with each other and we talk about stuff. Even if there's something where it's not in our best short-term interest, like we can have the conversation and we can both be reasonable about it and we'll work something out. So anything's on the table. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh, well, if anything's on the table, then this is a conversation you need to have. But they're like caught off guard by that we can have that kind of conversation. I know you've had the same conversations on your side too.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So many times
that's one of the great things about our relationship is that we know that we can have a reasonable conversation, which in this day and age does seem to be a rarity, especially if you look at politics and such.
Yeah. It's funny. Like there's been conversations with like lawyers over the years where they'll approach lawyers, or I think that just maybe a couple of times where we've had the legal teams that we use, or I've gotten outside opinions on something, and they'll say like, well, and it's kind of like they get that like hush tone, you know, and it's like, well, like, you know, the way you could do it with your partner is because you don't want him to think, and I'm like, no, I'm going to tell him exactly what you're like, just tell me, you know, it's like, I'm not trying to hide anything here. I'm not trying to like screw anybody out of anything. I can talk to Josh, and if it's the best thing for us, he's going to be okay with it, you know, and there will be a good, solid discourse back and forth, and we're going to come to a conclusion. So I've been on the same side of that on the, you know, on my end. And it's almost disheartening. I'm like, do you really have people that are like, how do I get my partner out of this? You know, or how do I, and you hear about these partnerships that end up with somebody getting screwed. Anyways, it's kind of, I'm grateful for it.
So we became partners, and well, let's talk about the whole dentist thing, because we brought that up. We got to close that loop. So you were at college, and I remember having the conversation with you. It sounded to me like you were pretty seriously like debating, like, do I go work for MWI full time, or do I go be a dentist? Yeah,
I was. And I had changed all my classes, you know, and I had like kind of committed, okay, I'm going to have to finish another year of school because I have no prerequisites. I mean, that was top priority, but I was learning quickly. I didn't like it, but I thought that's what life was. I was kind of convinced like, well, I guess I'm not going to love it, but I need to provide for my family and it's a good living. You know, that was kind of where I was at.
How did that decision go down? How did you make the choice? I'm going to risk everything on this MWI thing that's kind of getting rebooted, and Josh just moved to Hong Kong, and I'm going to go do that instead of taking the safe route and going to be a dentist, which you knew there was just a recipe, a formula to go do that.
There's obviously the gut feeling of it. I like I said before, our conversations motivated me. And I remember having feelings of excitement that I had never had before as it pertained to like work and providing for a family and, you know, all these decisions I had to make. It was a different gut reaction. It was a feeling of like, oh, I'm good at this. Oh, this makes sense. Oh, we work well together. Oh, you know, like there was a lot of building blocks whereas when I looked at the other option, it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel exciting. It didn't feel so there was that side. The other side is kind of taking the steps. Like I said, I mean, you had given me an opportunity to explore the option. And so I took the opportunity. And as I explored the opportunity, it resulted in a number of benefits: financial benefit, personal progress that I was seeing, learning a new industry that as I researched it more and more, I saw opportunity. And then it just came down to kind of a pros and cons list and identifying, do I want to bet on myself and go into this thing that's much more uncertain, or do I want to kind of go with this more secure thing? And it was just in my nature. And after all the pondering and thinking and everything I went through, it was just kind of this is the right step. And I didn't know at the time if it was going to be a long-term thing or if it was going to be just like a transitional thing for me, to help me learn a lot. I remember thinking early, like worst case scenario, I come out of this way better for it. Best case scenario, we build something that, helps me make a living and provide. And because those were my biggest, priorities at the time. And it was taking those steps and seeing the fruits of my labors early and then saying, I'm going to keep at it. And yeah, here we are.
I'm glad we got you, even though I could use the free dental work, but
you've got a brother for that, don't you? Or I have a brother for that.
All right. So now we've been partners for going on 7-8 years that we've been working together in MWI. A lot of stuff's happened during that time. What have been some of the standout growth experiences, challenges, overcoming challenges, investing in hope to see it through? What are some of the standout experiences that you've been through?
Okay. So I've said this already multiple times in this conversation, and I'm going to continue to say it. And I've said it on the podcast already. And maybe it's super simple. Maybe people are like, well, no, duh, you dummy. That makes sense. But what I've learned is that, and I hate to be so redundant, but when you take advantage of opportunities and you don't just like, you take advantage of it, but you really jump in with both feet and you say, I'm going to do my very, very best at this. And best case scenario, it results in something great. Worst case scenario, I got a good experience out of it. And so that's kind of been the process. And so when I look at our partnership and what we've built and what we've been doing, there's a number of moments that stand out to me. One is what we've talked about, just the initial thought of like, well, I'm going to go with you to this conference for an industry I know nothing about, see what happens, right? That led to opportunities. Once we got going, a couple of kind of fun little anecdotes, little stories, like you moved to Hong Kong, which we touched on very briefly, but you moved to Hong Kong to adopt a child who you now have and you've added your family. It's all awesome, right? You adopted a child from China, but you had moved to Hong Kong initially just to become more aware of the culture and society and language and all of those things, right? So that when you adopted somebody, you could relate. When you did that, at the time, we hadn't really thought about opening up an office in Hong Kong. At least I don't think you did. It was more just like a natural consequence because you weren't planning on being there for more than a year.
No, I thought we'd be there for a year, maybe 2 years. And I was just planning on working remotely from Hong Kong, which sounds crazy, but in our business, everything's online. It's just email. Did. I was like, I'll just work from Hong Kong. No big deal.
Yeah. And I was in Hawaii. So it actually time zones, it worked out pretty okay. I remember when I was that summer, it was a little harder, but we communicated, we brought in deals. You helped me, we had an interesting work schedule, but we made it work. And then you started getting people asking you about digital marketing in Hong Kong. And I remember specifically, and you can tell me because this is again the way I remember it, but I think it was like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce asked you to come speak about digital marketing.
Yep.
And you went, and I remember you being done with that and calling me and being like, or knowing you probably sent me an email. It probably wasn't a call, but you said, dude, I think there's an opportunity in Hong Kong for us to bring MWI here. Like people are asking me buyer questions and I'm doing some research and I'm seeing opportunity. And then we did some research and we realized as advanced as Hong Kong and a lot of parts of Asia, but Hong Kong especially are on business and maybe software and maybe technology, they were actually quite behind as it pertains to using the internet to do business.
Yeah, not like a year or two behind, like 10 years behind. Yeah. Like it was really odd.
Websites looked like they were built in the 90s or early 2000s. Nobody was using SEO or paid search really, or social media for business growth. And because it was all still like TV, billboards, storefronts, whatever. And so I remember we had this conversation of like, it's kind of like we went into a time machine and we knew what was coming digitally from an internet marketing
we could
standpoint.
See the future. Yeah.
We knew what was coming and they hadn't done it yet. And no American in their right mind had said, I'm going to go to Hong Kong and start a digital marketing agency. Like it wasn't nobody from the Western, I shouldn't say American, but from the, Western civilization had done that. that we could see. And I remember being like, what? Like Hong Kong? And I remember thinking, I'm studying international culture studies. I've lived all over the world. This would be kind of fun, Again, we went through this process, long story short, of hiring 2 or 3 different salespeople that all failed.
Yep.
And I remember we were like, you know what? Maybe this isn't the best idea. Maybe Hong Kong isn't going to happen. And again, I have this very clear memory and this moment of learning where I said, I just had this feeling like, I don't want to give up on it until I go there. Cause I hadn't been yet. I hadn't actually been and seen it. And I remember like, I've got to see this and feel it to know if this is an opportunity, because everybody we talked to said, oh, sales are different here. Remember? That was the thing we heard over and over. No, Corey, you're able to sell in the States and you have like a 10-day turnaround in the States. You don't understand the culture here. Like people are different. Business is different. This doesn't happen.
Yeah, this is what the salespeople we're hiring were telling Corey when he's trying to train him. I'd get on daily or weekly or whatever. And they're telling me this over and over. And I'm thinking like, well, maybe it isn't, but I didn't buy it. I had heard excuses as I've trained and built sales teams over the years. And I was like, I just don't know. So I remember telling you, and I think we had a sales guy at the time that, again, was definitely on the fence because he wasn't bringing any of business and all I heard was excuses. But I told you, like, let's get a week scheduled of just as many sales meetings as we can, just as many meetings as we can. And I'm going to come out for 7 days and let's see what happens. I've never been to Hong Kong. I've never been to, I lived in Japan as a kid, but that's a very different cultural experience, right? But I just had this feeling of like, I got to get out there and see it for myself. He scheduled a bunch of meetings and you scheduled some meetings and you said, okay, come on out, let's work. And I remember we worked. Do you remember how much we worked that week? It was like, we would leave your place, get on the ferry at like 6 or 7 in the morning. And we were in meetings until 10 PM. Like it was all day. I was exhausted. And I remember the first day that we were there, I was exhausted. I was drinking as much caffeine as I could to keep my eyes open. Like I was completely jet lagged. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the first meeting, and maybe that just sounds good, but I've thought it was with that baby company, the pregnancy clothing company. Yeah.
It was one of, if not the very first meeting that we had. We walked in, I put the sales process into place just as I did in the States, but I tweaked it for the market and the opportunity and the research that we had done. And we walked out of there with a verbal, if not signed agreement.
Yeah.
And I was like,
we landed that one.
And I remember looking at you and being like, yeah, it's possible here. Like, I don't know what these guys are talking about. We're going to do it. And by the time I left that week, I think we had 2 or 3 deals closed. And we were like, oh, here's the foundation. This is the foundation of something, and it is possible. And we just need to find the right guy. So then I took over. I came out there. This was, I think, 2015. Was it 15? When did you move out there?
2013. So this must have been 2014. Maybe it was 2015 because I did go through. Yeah, because I did go through a couple other sales guys, and that took some time.
Yeah, so I think it was 15. And I came out there after that quite a few times. I think in the next year and a half, 18 months, I think I came out there a total of 7 times or something. I'd come out, I'd close some deals, I'd go back, we'd figure out account management. I think we hired an account manager. But anyways, eventually we found our partner out there, Jason, who to this day is running it, and he's amazing, and took over. And I was able to train him and build him up and get him. And he bought in to the culture and he bought into the sales process. He grew the office and we grew pretty quick. We started, again, we saw an opportunity, we capitalized on it. We made sure we took those steps that I talked about to see if it was going to work, and it worked. And we just said, okay, let's jump all in. You were kind of running point on the office. We found Jason, he started helping. And then I remember you asked kind of the moments that really stick out to me, maybe in 2016 at this point. We now had a team of maybe 7 or 8 employees out there. We were using an office space for a client of ours. We had a number of good sized clients, and there was this one trip. Every time I would come out, and this was after we had found Jason, but I would tell him every time, I'm going to be there for 7. I'm going to be there for 10 days. Book as many sales meetings as you can. You remember that? That was the approach. Yep. Like, Corey's coming in.
That was the recipe.
He's going to come in. He's going to go to as many meetings as humanly possible in a day, and he's going to close as many deals as he can. Oh man, those are good times. It's so fun to think about that.
We'll eat some dim sum.
Yeah, we'll eat some good food. Bit. We'll hustle all around Hong Kong. We spend a lot of money on taxis and ride a lot of subways, but we'll close as many deals as we can. We're still a very small business. Let's say, for the sake of conversation, we're doing 20 or 30 grand a month in business, but we've got a small team and we're growing. We get a lead while I'm there. Get into the office. I'm always there super early because everybody in Hong Kong, you don't get to work till 9 or 10. But I was always jet lagged, so I'd always get to our office at like 7 or 8, and I'd get ahead on US stuff for the day. And a lead came in to our Hong Kong website. I looked at it. It was called Swiss Coat. The website was terrible. Looked like it was built in 1980 before the internet was a thing. Like it was just like, it was an old website. And I think, oh, this is just a small deal. But we are literally turning over every single stone that we can turnover here to find business. So Jason gets in and I say, hey, schedule a meeting with these guys, call them. And so it would be like literally he'd call them in Cantonese, schedule meetings, and then we'd make sure they spoke English so that I could come in and do the deal, because a lot of business is done in English in Hong Kong. He doesn't know anything about the business. We both agree, let's just put together a proposal. For most of these businesses, knowing that we could turn them around pretty quick because there was such a high demand, I would put together a proposal for business and like a scope of work before we even went to the meeting, just so we were prepared to close it if we were given the opportunity. We go into the meeting and I remember pulling up to this building and there are Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Bentleys and whatever other luxury cars driving outside. And then I see that it's actually the headquarters for the TV station for Hong Kong. And it's a very reputable, it's over on the Kowloon side. So I hadn't been over there much, but it's a very big business part of town. We're like, maybe these guys are a little more legit. It was on Swiss Code, it said that they were a manufacturer of glasses lenses. We're like, okay, maybe they're a bigger deal than we thought. We get up to the, high floor, one of the highest, whatever floors, 30th something floor of the building. The doors open to this office that was probably the coolest, nicest office space I'd ever seen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this is like a really legit business. They let us in. It's beautiful. We get sit down in this boardroom that's overlooking the bay. And I'm like, oh man, this is these guys are legit. This actually might be a good sized deal. We start talking. We go through the whole pitch. We name drop some of our clients in the US that they had heard of. They were impressed. It was this great conversation. And my proposal that I had created going into this meeting was for $5,000 US. So it's 40,000 Hong Kong dollars. And it was for like some basic marketing to help get these guys on the map, this little company that I thought it was, $5,000 a month. And just for any of you salespeople out there that are listening, anchor price is a real thing. You don't want to be the first to say price most of the time, right? You want to let the price come out or have them talk about price first, because once you lay this anchor down, it's hard to move, right? It gives you a negotiation point that you need to, that once it's there, it can't be taken away. And so I don't want to.
And also the thing here is that when you come into a big business that's really legit and you realize these people are huge, it's not that you're going to give them a $5,000 website, but charge them 50 grand just because they can pay for it. It's that when you see what kind of business they are, you're like, they need more than a $5,000 website. Exactly. Like a $5,000 website will not do for this company.
Exactly. And this was for, some marketing too. And it was like, we were learning the best we could as quickly as we could what they needed. And again, there was so much opportunity and very little competition for our level as this company with this US experience, 20 years experience or whatever, coming in. Anyway, so I had this proposal for some marketing work for $5,000 a month. But I asked them first, I said, so you get an idea for what we do. It sounds like you need some paid search marketing. You're looking to launch in the States after growing some Hong Kong business, whatever. Like, what's your budget? What budget have you set aside for this project? And the response, I'm sitting there with Curtis, one of my co-CEO at MWI, who's at the time was head of account management, but he was coming with me out there on a lot of these trips, and I'm sitting there next to him and Jason. And her response is, our budget per month is $150,000 US. And I had a contract for 5,000, and right, looking at me in the face. And we all it was so funny because the vibe in the room, we all knew how giddy we were. I wanted to laugh out loud. I legitimately, I'm not exaggerating, I bit my tongue so hard. You're
trying not to smile at all.
Because it was just a funny experience. I'm not saying in any way there was no greed involved or anything. It was just hilarious. I'm I kept asking myself in these moments, how am I sitting in this boardroom in Hong Kong with the company telling me they have $150,000 a month for our little business to take care of it? What happened? How did I get? And it was just, the whole experience was just kind of comical, I say, yeah. I think we could make that work, trying to play it cool. And anyways, she says, yeah, get us a proposal over. We leave, we step out, we get in the elevator, and I under my breath say, guys, keep your cool. There's cameras everywhere. Don't start high-fiving, right? And let's not chest bump yet. We still keep our cool, and it's just kind of this nervous, giddy excitement. And then we sit in the little red taxi, and as it pulls away, we all just erupted in laughter and high fives. This just happened. And that client closed. It closed. And now I'm not saying this to, toot our horn of wow, this company gave us a lot of money. Because a lot of that money actually, the way that what we do works is it's actually going to Facebook or it's going to Google, right? A lot of that money was ad spend, but a good chunk of it was for MWI. And that was, I told Jason before I left that we had that meeting. And then in that trip, we had 2 or 3 other meetings that were all huge. They all turned out to be huge deals. We left a legitimate business having come on a 7 or 10 day trip with a few clients. We left with like legit book, like incoming accounts receivable for the following month. And I told Jason, this is your capital to build a team and to build a business. You've got it. Let's do it. Right. And then we left and that client was brutal. I was up all hours of the night and early in the morning, as was Curtis and our marketing team. But
I remember being in Singapore doing a phone call with them because we had like the whole team like on this call. And
it was insane, but it pushed us so hard to provide for this company, like at this level that we never had before, and to grow as a team and to grow in revenue and to hire and to bring on the talent that we needed. And it was just this huge boost for the company, both for Hong Kong and the States and MWI as a whole. And we've had a lot of those moments over the years, you know, those opportunities that presented themselves that we took advantage of. And if we would have been, you know, afraid to get in over our heads, it would have never happened. So a lot of moments like that. And then the other sides that I really think back to that give me hope. And aside from the business and the growth of the business and stuff, is just the people, man, the people and the clients, the people that work for us and the people that we work for, the relationships we've built and watching them grow and progress. And then as you bring on a team and you're able to provide value to their lives and income for their families and medical benefits when they need medical benefits, and, you know, support and letting when they're building their families or when they have an emergency where you're able to say, yeah, we can help you. We can make sure you're taken care of while you have to deal with this. Those moments and just seeing the good in people and trying our best to manage things, you know, from a place of optimism and hope and goodness. I've just seen so many, both for clients and for employees. Like I've just seen so many great things that give me hope in people, you know. And again, when sometimes the world's trying to tell us there's not much of it, but I disagree.
Bring this full circle. You grew up in an environment that taught you to believe that all good things must come to an end. And then you had this life-changing experience with your mission president when you were a missionary. Your leader taught you to reverse that self-talk and turn it around. And now we've had a lot of great times, but we've had a lot of tough times as well running this business together. But how does that lesson of turning pessimism into optimism, where does this come up? How does this come up? How do you use this in your professional life now to say, hey, it's going to work out. I got to keep going.
You and I see this the same way. And we've had a lot of conversations, difficult conversations where, hey, we have to pay for this, this, and this, and there's no money. Or, hey, this employee that was critical just quit. Or, hey, this client that was, you know, a quarter of our revenue just canceled, whatever, right? Like we've had a lot of these conversations, and you and I in those moments, and the way that I look at that is I see every one of these obstacles as just a stepping stone, an opportunity to get better and to grow. Before I would have seen that and said, we're hosed. Like this is the end, you know, well, naturally it ended because that's how things happen. That's the way the world works. The paradigm shift and the change in mentality has allowed me to see these difficult circumstances and see these difficult moments of real great struggle as, like I said, just stepping stones and opportunities to get better and smarter and have faith and hope that if you just do your best and you do it the right way, looking out for people and being ethical and honest and, you know, full of integrity, the best that you can, and really looking out for people and trying to provide value. And if you're just doing your best and you work hard, good things tend to happen. That's not to say that bad things don't, but I also look at worst case scenario a lot, which sounds maybe pessimistic, but a lot of times I'll look at a situation and my previous self, you know, the first 20 years of my life, I would have said, here's all the negatives and that's why we're in trouble, right? Like that's why this isn't going to work out. But now I say, let me just jump straight to the worst possible thing that could happen. And then let me be okay with that. Well, what's the worst case scenario in this situation? Well, the worst case scenario is we lose the business. Like it goes under, you know, which I don't, you know, hopefully that never happens. But there's been a few times early on, especially where it's like worst case scenario, this doesn't work out. Like I'll just go and do this, this, and this, or I've learned a lot of things so I can take that with me and build on it with the next, you know, looking at it from that perspective, but doing it through a lens of hope and saying, well, let's put our best foot forward and give it an honest effort so that doesn't happen. But I know what it would look like if it did. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. Gives you kind of a level of confidence moving forward. And like I said, that hope and the approach to get there.
This seems like a good way to wrap things up. Any last words?
the only thing I would say is, in a world where there's a lot of uncertainty, and, the past 6 months, especially, just for the sake of posterity, we're talking in September of 2020. It's been a heck of a year. You and I met maybe in March, and said the world seems to be crumbling around us. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of discouragement. Who do we want to be as a business, and what do we want to achieve? And it led us to this conversation of hope. I was actually talking to Bridget yesterday. There's this documentary on Netflix right now called The Social Dilemma. I think it's called.
I haven't heard of that one.
And it's all about basically Facebook and Google and all the how, and it's a lot of these people that created these tools, that created the algorithms and are on the founding teams that are now saying, do not use these things. They are ruining your teenagers, and they are ruining society, and they were
and they were designed to be addictive.
Mm-hmm, they were designed to hook you in and not let you go. They're coming out and saying that, and there's a lot of research on that now. And it was funny because we watched it, and I then said, that's what I do for work. We run a digital marketing agency, and my whole job is to help businesses acquire new, whether it's accounts or sales or whatever, through digital means. But we've always taken this approach to it that's no, let's be particular with who we work with, and let's do it the right way. Because there's always going to be room for marketing and business and, good business practice. And so let's do this world of digital marketing. Let's do it the right way. And let's do it the right way for ourselves and our own, so we can sleep at night, but also let's do it for our clients, and let's find the type of customers we want to work with. And that's always been our mentality. But early this year, we started talking about hope more, and hope brands and companies out there that believe in things the way we believe in, and believe in humanity, and believe in the way that you can use all these tools and resources to build your local community or your national community or whatever. How can we do good and make the world a better place in the small way that we can with what we're good at and what our business does, and how do we tie that to hope? And then that naturally led us to this conversation of, well, what if we started talking to people about this more? And then it led us to the podcast, right? And it's funny because so many people say hope is not a strategy. That's something that you hear. It's literally written on T-shirts or, whatever. You can see that on a lot of business books and stuff. There are a
lot of blog posts, a lot of people. You Google hope strategy, you'll get a lot of hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy.
In Google.
And I get that. I understand that. You can't sit around and rest on your laurels and say, well, I hope one day I'm successful, or I hope I'm a good dad, or I hope, and just sit around and wait for that hope to amount to something.
Yeah. Hope by itself is not a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to act, and you have to, but I truly believe that there is good in the world, and that there's a lot of hope in the world. And if you look at the world through that lens of hope, then strategies will come from that will yield more hope and opportunity and good in the world. And so you and I believe that. It's at our core. We've talked about it a lot. And so that's what led us to this moment, right? Where we're having this conversation, where we have this podcast that, whether we continue to grow it and it's getting, a great following and stuff, or it's just me and you talking to great people and one or two people are hearing it at some point, who cares? It's just more the idea that we believe that there's hope out there. And we believe that if you start any strategy with hope in mind and with optimism and this kind of ambition, and you believe that there is hope out there, then good things will happen. And that's how we ended up where we are now. And after, we've heard now my life story, here we are. And I'm excited about it. I love the conversations we're having. It's funny. I told you earlier when we were talking, and it was well, should we interview each other and stuff? And I was I don't know, maybe. And I was well, maybe it'll just be therapeutic, if nothing else. You and I are, it's funny. We've talked about a lot in our partnership and kind of put the story together, but then also, realizing talking about it really gives me hope for what we're working on now and what the future holds, and our kids, and whatever, everything else. There's just a lot of good out there, and we want to find it.
All right. Thank you, Corey, for being on the Hope Strategy podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.